Yeah.
If you think about it, all the little things that you do that you don't pay any attention to, but we were inside our apartment, which by Israeli standards is big, but by American standards it's quite small.
How many square feet is it, Peter?
It's 120 meters, 125 meters, so 1,300 square feet.
Uh-huh.
Let's say.
Like
live on
Not
YouTube.
huge. Wow.
Figuring out how to do some sort of exercise so you don't go insane, and the first week's not so hard. It's
Was it really?
We had a lot.
Well, even when I had COVID, I felt like I could go walk my dog because I'm not close to anybody. You know,
This was a man, wasn't it?
No, well, this was the whole quarantine
Yeah.
system
Yeah, I'm
that
sorry I didn't get
was
there.
put in
Yeah.
place, and
yeah.
I don't
Then
even know when, oh, I was
they
with my
did
mother.
quick testing.
She would have liked that.
At the airport.
So she's okay. She's.
we would know within a couple hours.
Yeah.
In a couple hours.
They would say,
Getting
go home, and you
insecure,
may have to be at home, they would say up to a day, but within 2 hours, we got the text that, and everybody's there. You cannot exist without your telephone number, everything is done through your phone, so instantly we get, okay, you're clear.
Well,
one if you got at the airport and you did test positive.
Then
you
you're
had to
home for
quarantine.
10
I paid that.
then you're quarantined for
I
10
said, I
days.
know, but where did,
Oh,
did where
did you get
money
on
came
the-
to pay that? She goes,
Oh,
Oh,
no,
oh,
no,
no, this was
okay.
coming to,
Arriving.
this was arriving.
She's,
But what if you
finally I said.
No,
you know,
you already had to have been tested,
I would
and you
never
had to
let somebody
show that
take
you were
advantage
clear
of me.
before you
Oh,
can even
yeah.
go to
She
the
had
airport.
calmed down then.
But they had a really fast testing system that, nothing like, it was very
A
easy.
few hours,
It was,
although
one time
when we stayed up and we got tested, it was by American standards, you had to have a test within 24 hours. So that, it meant the day you had a
and
day,
at that time, couldn't be the rapid test.
so
had to be the
it
regular
had to
test.
be whatever that's
The
called.
Tiger test.
You know, not the
Antigen
not the antigen test, but the real test, whatever it was. So we were up
Oh, I gotta
at
be ready.
midnight, standing in the rain outside in a line
Yeah, what
in
am I
order
gonna
to
do?
get this
Lay there?
test. But we had the results in this morning.
Because we were leaving at midnight the next day,
Yeah,
so
it
we
all
had
had
to
to
be
be
within
within
24 hours. For the American government, this
But
was.
yeah, that wasn't Israel, that was American.
No.
Means I gotta leave the
Israel never
quarter to
went to
six.
24 hours.
Means I gotta get up at 5.
But here, it's hard to get a test done in 2 hours. You didn't get it
Tomorrow?
done.
I got nothing to do. How can I not do all right?
There, they
It's
got it
surgery
done.
tomorrow.
And
Yeah.
then they went to the other, the
Yes, you will.
fast test, and you just, by the
Okay,
time you
well,
got home.
Well, I have,
postponed
my
it
watch
to
is
stay after
that's a
the
little
test.
fast, but my watch will
I wanted
give
to
it
make
another
sure
couple
I-
minutes.
That was very
Are you going to dress and just?
Yeah.
Are you going to Chinese food?
Yeah, we can talk about that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, we went like, oh my.
I mean, it
I've
was,
already
uh,
gotten notices
The
of.
defense minister was fired in the
Yes.
midst of all,
And I've gotten 3 notices.
because
so
he's the
far
only
on
one that's been
demonstrations.
standing up to
They're not-
Netanyahu.
Yeah.
There's
Well,
demonstrations already happening.
I saw
Now
that the
in the city?
demonstrations were happening, but I wasn't sure all the different places.
It's all over.
China.
It's in Medellin, it's in every town,
Oh, was
plus it's in Tel Aviv and Caesarea, Sympathy, where he lives, where.
Oh.
It's water.
Well, what
And
about
in
your-
Jerusalem?
Are you
Person that you
outpatient
put
tomorrow
in
or
place?
to keep you in the slammer?
Depends on
It's
how well my
dark.
surgeon is.
Sorry to inform you.
Let me know.
Foreign Minister,
Okay,
the
if you
bird
need
she put in place is cats.
Cats is gonna be the, and he's a.
We
Doesn't
missed
matter,
last one.
It doesn't,
Like,
but it doesn't hurt. It just means now directly in
I think it's flat.
directly.
Stay
as
overnight?
opposed to
Stay overnight.
Syracuse.
Yeah,
Yeah,
We
I
won't
stayed
have
over
anybody
there
get
too.
his blood pressure.
Unless, last time Netanyahu did this,
Where
the
they wanted to
demonstrations
be,
were
it's
so
like, okay.
large and so
Okay.
fierce, he backed off.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
better there than at home and
Yeah.
Was it your-
questioning, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
what
is
do
it
I
learn
do?
not to back off, you think?
I don't think he'll back off.
So, yeah, if they
You
do.
don't think so?
No, and I also
They
don't,
don't-
I think it's been in the
generally
works
keep
for a long
Yeah.
time, and I
I
think
was in.
he was waiting
As
until
long as
after the
you can
American
stand
election.
up and pee, that's it.
Yeah.
And
Not,
just sit.
not necessarily, not necessarily at the same time,
Because it's.
but,
Yeah, right now it's kinda
I think his first, he was in for 5 days. I mean, that was in
He
09.
did it in an hour.
for me,
For me. But he also, he was,
Okay.
he was, because.
So I don't know if we
He
are,
lost a lot of blood.
are we on?
Oh.
Yeah, here. Because I don't really care for on or not, but
Somebody does.
there haven't people walking, they told me at the brunch. Yes, Tom noticed that I referenced him last week. I got an email almost saying that I had guessed right about what his opinion. We will, I'm sure it will come up more.
Okay.
And I'm hoping to leave some time at the end here. So
Well, I was curious because it just happened like so
Oh, yeah.
quickly. that-
you cannot,
It just happened to be with.
I look at the times of Israel periodically throughout the day because things keep coming up in terms of the war and the like. And then I saw this
Yeah, it popped up on my cell.
Galant
Yeah,
fire.
that's not good.
What happened?
Oh,
What did
I
I
wasn't
miss?
listening
What
to
did I
that.
miss?
The defense minister, who is the guy who's been standing up to Netanyahu, is independent, standing in Likud. He's probably the most popular politician in Israel, at least he was a month or two ago, was just fired.
Oh.
In the midst of a war. I mean, everyone does that, right? You fire your defense minister.
Oh.
And
Yeah, I didn't know.
Wow.
That's right.
So who do you think he'll put in?
it's already done.
Who?
Kat, his name is Katz. He's just an apparatchik. He just is a Netanyahu boy.
Oh.
And you will remember 2 times ago, I told you about this guy, Gidon Star, who had sort of sold out to join them. He's now the foreign minister, so he's got his reward. But Netanyahu does all the foreign ministry work
Okay,
himself anyway. So
Oh, exactly.
So what do you think the greater implications are?
it'll depend on how these demonstrations. As I said, instantaneously, there were demonstrations all across the country.
Oh,
And
yeah,
it's
I was
like-
surprised as quickly as he
you
fired.
know, it's like, first of all, they're all
organized.
organized. It's
You're good?
Oh,
in,
yeah.
so just like here, in many ways, it's parallel to here. You have an evenly divided country. And you see how this goes. It'll be the way he reads, the way Netanyahu reads the TV. His popularity has been growing.
Which is probably why he did it, do you think?
I think that was part of the time. The last thing
Yeah,
was
like-
being moved into in Iraq.
Popularity, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Very much.
Okay, we're going to talk about some theories. Are we up and running?
Yep, but I
Like-
ditched the break.
Just like my grandchildren. Yeah, I say to our Lily, who's our oldest grandchild, how was school today? Okay.
Well, at least it was positive. The thumb didn't go down, so.
Okay. So we're ready to start. And if we start, if there's anybody else who's going to find their way in, they'll find their way in. Okay. Here's the question that I want to pose you. There are no handouts this week, so none of you can be sitting there with bated breath, waiting for the handout. This isn't really based on text. What it is based upon, as I've said many times already, is I study every summer at the Hartman Institute, which was founded by David Hartman, who was a philosopher. He named it for his father, so it is called the Shalom Hartman Institute. It is currently run by Shalom's grandson, David's son, Daniel, which we would pronounce Daniel. And even in Hebrew, you would pronounce it Daniel, but he pronounces it Daniel. Okay, so everybody has the right to pronounce their name however they want. I'm sure that's how his father pronounced it. So he goes by Daniel Hartman, who has been running the Institute as long as I've been going there, and I started going there in 2008. So what is that now? That's 16 years ago. And It's now being co-run, interestingly enough. This is an organization that has two presidents, a president in Israel and a president in the United States. And it used to be one was responsible for Israel and the other was responsible for North America, but now they're just both presidents. Don't ask me to explain further. That's the way it is.
By the way, you can get them on Jewish TV if you've got.
Oh, yeah.
Spectrum.
And Daniil, I am very influenced by him, but not always positively. In other words, sometimes he says things that I strongly disagree with. He does come out of an Orthodox background, and as liberal, small l, liberal as he is, and as pluralistic as he is, and I can't think of anyone more pluralistic based upon who attends his programs and how he responds to them, still that orthodoxy comes through often, and there's a divide there. There's a divide there for me. As an example, the podcast that I've recommended to you, I did at the brunch, which is called For Heaven's Sake, he does with Yossi Klein Halevi, who is also very interesting and who I've learned a great deal from, but mostly positively, but not always, sometimes negatively too. He grows out of a very right-wing background, and periodically that comes through, even though he's not that right-wing, as right-wing a person now, but it comes through periodically. And they disagree with each other for these same reasons. And that's what makes this podcast interesting. It's really worth listening to. And they're always 33 minutes or less, so it's like, you can listen to it and not have to devote your entire day to it. Okay, so mostly what I'm going to be talking about are things that he has been talking about, particularly this last summer, but really for the last 15 years. So here's the question that I want to pose. Is, and if it is, how is our relationship with Israel as American Jews foundational? And this is, I think, an important question right now, and it'll come up. It's always an important question, but particularly right now, because of all of the things that have happened in the United States in the last year, that has caused North American Jewry to think about its relationship with Israel, perhaps in ways that it had not thought about before, or not for a long time before, or it put Israel on the radar screen in a way that it couldn't be ignored in the same way that maybe it was before. Does that make sense in terms of what I want to try to do? Okay, so let me start with this. I'm going to try to kind of define Jewishness. This is very dangerous, what I'm about to do. I'm going to try to define Jewishness as a sense of belonging to a people with whom we share a history and a story for 3,000 years. Now, some of you are nodding your head. I don't know if that means that you understood what I said or you agree with what I said. And nobody is jumping to volunteer, so I assume it means that you understood what I said.
It makes sense.
It doesn't, obviously, I think it makes sense. But my point about this is you'll notice that I didn't really define Jewishness theologically. I tried to get at Jewishness by a sense of belonging to something, a group, a people.
A tribe.
The old word for that would be a tribe. And we used to make fun of it, right? We used to refer to people as MOT, member of the tribe.
Oh, okay.
Never heard that? Really? And my dad told me everybody of his generation that when they were in the army during the Second World War, there happened to have been a lot of Jews in the Quartermaster Corps. What a surprise. There were a lot of Jews. Yeah, both of them. And when you were in line to get your uniforms, which notoriously did not fit, you would yell ahead, "Landsman!" And then you got clothes that fit. In English, we would say member of the tribe or MOT, right? Okay, so if we're okay with starting with the notion of belonging to something, and what I said was belonging to a people, but the people has a story. And so we're belonging to a story. And this is a real question, whether how strongly we identify to what I like to call the Jewish story. I think story is the foundation of everything Jewish. So if this was a class on theology, I would be talking about narrative theology. Because I think that's how Jews have done theology, through our stories. In the Middle Ages, we do theology systematically. We're influenced by Christians, particularly Protestants, and we do systematic theology. But if you go back to the earliest, wow.
That's one of my daughters.
Night crept in.
The theology are the stories of the Bible. The theology are the stories that the rabbis tell, in my view. Okay, so I'm always tied into story. So we're talking about a group of people and its story, and that story is kind of a historical story. I don't think we should get too tied in with what is exactly history, what is exactly fact, and what isn't. It's more the nature of the story.
There is no fact to the story.
Well, no, so
Very little.
So some of you will know that I went to school, that the two rabbis in the room here went to school in Cincinnati. And when I applied to Hebrew Union College, not when I was a student, but when I applied, or actually when I was thinking of applying, the president of Hebrew Union College was Nelson Glick. Does everybody remember Nelson Glick?
Just the name.
Okay. He was a world famous archaeologist. When he died, he was on the cover of Time magazine.
Wow.
Okay. He was very well-known archaeologist, and he had a little bit of a side gig also. When he was in the Middle East during the Second World War, searching out archaeological sites, he was also working for the OSS, which is the forerunner of the CIA. So he had an interesting career, but he would have told you he was a biblical archaeologist. And what he was trying to do was demonstrate the truth of the Bible. In other words, he knew that the Bible was a story, but he thought it was all based on facts, and that as an archaeologist, he could literally uncover those facts. Now, that's not in fashion any longer. What's in fashion today is an understanding that archaeology is a science in and of itself, and it may support the Bible and may not support the Bible, but that's not relevant to the doing of archaeology. You don't do the archaeology with the goal of supporting the Bible. Although there are still some people who do that. But by and large, the credible archaeologists, the ones with standing, aren't doing that anymore. But it's not that long ago that Nelson Glick was doing that kind of thing. Okay, so we're okay with what I started with? So now let's talk about the difference, because the theme here is going to be the difference and whether we can bridge the difference between North American Jewry and Israeli Jewry. I started with, is our relationship foundational? Because I believe it is foundational. And if it is not foundational, it should be foundational. That's why I'm a Zionist.
Define foundational. I'm not sure what you're.
Another way of putting it would be essential. So I think that American Jewish identity, North American Jewish identity, we don't want to make our Canadian friends unhappy. They wouldn't care anyway because they're all nice. But is Zionism is an essential component to it. And I am worried that that is diminishing. And so I am interested in bridging this, understanding what's going on here, what's going on there, trying to bridge it. Indeed, I've said this many times, we're sort of living this bridge of explaining America to Israelis and Israel to Americans, who all think they know. Americans think they understand Israel because they have been there. Somebody said to me at the brunch, I'm thinking of making Aliyah. What do you think I should do? And I suggested making a trip to Israel before you decide. And the person said to me, oh, I've been there. I said, as a tourist. And it was years ago. do you follow what I mean? And Israelis are all convinced that they understand America and they know American Jews. And I may have told you this example, stop me if I did, that one of the kibbutzim, I don't remember which one's name, Smoke thinks it's near Oz, but I'm not sure which one it is. They're struggling right now with what they're going to do. The government wants them to go back to their border kibbutz and will help financially support that. There are people, there's about a third of the kibbutz that wants to do that. There's about a third of the kibbutz that can't imagine going back and they're really done with the whole kibbutz idea. And then there's a third that wants to move the kibbutz to a new spot further into the Negev, where they feel would be safer. But they're claiming that that would be a $25 million move, which the government is not supporting. So what is their solution? We'll just go to the United States and raise the money out of the Jewish community in the United States. And that's the thinking of a lot of Israeli Jews, is sort of America Jewry as Israel's Dutch uncle. Right? That's where all the money is. And so you can't really blame them for thinking that, right? We fostered that thinking for decades. They needed that thinking. They needed our help. And so there's plenty of misunderstanding on both sides, is my point. Okay, so let's look at the issue today, the 600-pound gorilla in the room, right? Which is the war. Yeah.
Why do you say misunderstanding when there is a problem that we always raise money and it's in the budget?
No, but it doesn't. First of all, the situation isn't the same anymore. Israel's a first world country. It doesn't need a Dutch uncle. In other words, all of what we do in the American Jewish community doesn't come close to what the American government does every year. Right? The American government roughly produces for Israel about $3 billion a year. So even if all the federations together come up with $500 million that goes to Israel or even more, it doesn't play the same role that it did once upon a time. And that's leaving aside the whole Israeli economy and you know that the Israeli economy is stronger than many of the economies in Europe. The standard of living in Israel is higher than many of the countries in Europe. So it's just different now, but that doesn't mean that we aren't holding on to the old thinking. Okay, so let's talk about the 600-pound gorilla, the war. How do Israelis perceive this war? And by the way, we could have had this class after 2021 and the war that happened in Gaza in 2021. And I'd be saying the same thing. Not much has changed. The scale of it has changed, but not the theory, not what's underneath it. Israelis understand Hamas's agenda to be to terrorize Israel by murdering, raping, and pillaging Israelis, forcing Israelis to kill Palestinians, Palestinian innocents, so they will win the battle for international support and sympathy. This is how Israel perceives what's going on, that Hamas is an existential threat. It's its weakest enemy, but it's an existential threat because of its influence on the world.
And
And
it
it-
seems to be successful.
Right, and if you look at this, that is exactly what happened. That's why you build an underground city and you fight from hospitals, schools, and mosques. So that for Israel to defend itself, it has to take out hospitals, schools, and mosques with significant collateral damage, which produces sympathy for the Palestinian point of view. And the thinking is, this can be a very key element or the key element in what ultimately undoes Israel. So Israelis perceive this as existential. Now, they add to that, it's not just Hamas, it's also Hezbollah up north, and it's also the militias in Iraq and Syria, and it's also the Houthis in Yemen. And some would argue Palestinians in the West Bank who are in sympathy. That's 6. And the 7th is, of course, Iran, the head of the whole octopus. So Israelis see this in an existential way. I'm not sure Americans do. How do Americans see this? By the way, before I go to American, because Israelis see it the way that I just described, they believe it is a war of moral obligation, that they are obligated to fight this war because their existence is at stake. And so morality is on their side. Does that make sense? I'm telling you how they perceive it. I can tell you how I perceive it, right? Now, I'm not talking about the excesses and I'm not talking about every case, but the overarching concern. I think on this side of the Atlantic, what is focused on is the imbalance of physical power. That Israel is like the big kid beating up the small kid on the playground. Doesn't matter that the small kid started it. If you're the big kid, really big, if you're in high school and the grade school kid comes and kicks you in the shins, all that the teacher who is out on the playground sees is the imbalance of power. And so what does that yard monitor say to the big kid? You're not allowed to hit him back.
I think a lot of the American media sees it that way.
Well, okay, so I totally agree with you because that's the easiest way to see it. Just look at the circumstance. Clearly, Israel is disproportionately more powerful than Hamas in terms of physical power. Yeah, they're throwing sticks and stones, and Israel has modern armaments, is the way it's looked at. And so we have a disconnect between the way Israelis look at this and many North Americans, including some North American Jews, particularly younger ones. I see heads very nodding, particularly people who might be in conversation with some of those younger ones. And so it's a very difficult kind of disconnect.
What I don't understand is that if the media in America is controlled by a Jewish cabal.
Of course, we know that's true.
But there are another. I mean,
You left out that they're
Salzburger,
communists also.
But anyway, what I have never seen reported is what all you see is that 41, the Palestinian Authority, or I don't know.
No, it's not the PA, it's Hamas.
The Hamas Authority has reported that 41,000 Palestinians have been killed.
Right.
I have never seen it reported the way you described it last time, that 17,000
Or more.
of them were fighters.
17 or 18,000,
Yeah.
Israel identifies as fighters.
So I don't understand. I mean, we do have influence in the media in the United States, Jews. I mean, Salzberger is the publisher of the New York Times. It's never been reported that way in the New York Times.
Yeah, and NPR has problems with it too, and so do, and so do all that. That requires a degree of subtlety. If you are looking at it only from the imbalance of power, doesn't matter that half of them are fighters. Just like it doesn't matter on the schoolyard that this little kid, for all I know, he started it and he has a power saw. I mean, it doesn't matter because he's still a little kid. It doesn't matter whether he's a fighter or whether he's innocent or what. It does matter because certainly collateral damage creates a greater kind of moral revulsion than against fighters. But if you only see the imbalance, that difference is sort of small. What really is big is the difference in power. And so Israelis respond back with, we're not supposed to defend ourselves. We don't have a choice, is what they're saying. We don't have a choice because they chose to hide where they did and to cause, but we feel that they're not the little kid on the point. They're actually killing us. They killed 1,000 of us on October 7th, and they're for real killing us. They're saying to Americans, the way you see it is just not the reality. Yes.
When, what you're saying is the kind of reporting you're talking about is accompanied by a greater, I think, scrutiny of what's going on in the West Bank.
Yes.
And that's been going on for a long time, but we just haven't really looked at it. And that, I think that makes a big difference too.
I was listening to somebody whose favorite phrase, I think it was some podcast, something on it, who kept saying 1,000% correct. That's such a silly thing to say, right? Yeah, it's like turning in Spinal Tap, turn it up to 11, right? Maximum is maximum. But you're exactly correct. And how do I know you're correct? Because it was the next thing I was going to say. So Israelis say, what, I'm not supposed to defend myself? And Americans say something like, the Israeli bombing of Gaza is not really a response to Hamas, but part of a pattern of abuse made possible by Israel's power, whose real agenda is to eliminate Palestinians.
You're talking about the general public, you're not talking about Jewish.
Well, no, I think Jews are making this argument too, that particularly young Jews, that what they are saying is, just like Nancy said, let's not just look at this thing, what's been going on for the last 40 years in the West Bank and Israel's treatment of Palestinians. And there's something to this. I mean, I'm in total agreement that you can make an argument that says that what we see here is not defense, but it's an excuse to eliminate Palestinians. And I think if you're talking about my pal Bezalel Smotrich or Itamar Ben-Gvir, that's exactly right. Unfortunately, they have power. If you're talking about average Israelis, I don't think it's right at all.
Well, Netanyahu has said something similar to that they wanted to eliminate every one of them.
I am unaware of Netanyahu ever saying it like that. He's enabled the people who say it, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and others like them, but he himself has been pretty careful never to say that.
He said he wants to eliminate the Hamas fighters,
He
one.
wants to completely destroy Hamas, is what he says. That's not the same thing as completely destroying the Palestinians. But do you see how the dialogue, the North American perspective is not silly. And I believe Israelis need to take it more seriously than they do. Okay. It's also internally, just setting this aside for a minute, it is a mistake in my view in America, North America, for us to dismiss our young people because we don't like what they're saying. I think that that's a mistake.
We need to educate them.
That will be understood paternalistically and not succeed. We need to engage them.
Yes, college campuses, this is what's going on, this is what they're seeing, that injustice or
Right.
what it seems
I think
like.
actually in all of the far left in the American Jewish community, this is what I think they're seeing.
Because my grandson very much identifies as being Jewish, he goes to Brandeis, but I cannot talk to him about this subject. He does not see it,
So the suggestion that I have, is rather than trying to convince, I think that has to be a byproduct, not a goal.
and I think it's maturity. I think
Right,
that-
that's true too, but to say, I want to hear your point of view, I want you to hear my point of view. It's a subtle kind of, because I do not think that their point of view is silly. I don't agree with it. I'm pretty clear on who I am, right? In terms, but from their perspective, they're seeing an imbalance and they're seeing a history that supports their point, the point that they're trying to make. That, of course, there is other imbalances and other stories in history that supports what I said about the Israeli perspective. The right starting point, I think, is to talk to each other about this. Okay, now, if we're in agreement so far, it's in terms of this disconnect and why it is so hard, we should then ask ourselves, historically, how have North American Jews engaged with Israel? Yeah.
Can I ask you, the question is, if we're bombing the militants who are in the hospitals and all these schools and sensitive places, we are not eliminating their idea. We can, Hamas is an idea, so.
I'm with you on this. So, and I've said this many times, I'm happy to say it many more times, that Netanyahu is playing a political game when he says he wants complete destruction of Hamas. I mean, America could not completely destroy ISIS, right? Even with our allies. And that's because of what you just said. These are ideas, and they will have a way of resurfacing.
Well, and the more that die, the more.
You create martyrs.
Create more,
You
yeah.
create martyrs, and that's one way to look at it. So Daniil he said something out of the way, meaning it was not the main point of the podcast, but a couple times ago, that what Simone finally refers to as the whack-a-mole game that is going on in Gaza, that as soon as you clear one area, they pop up in another area, may actually be a strategy. You heard that. And what the strategy was, that Israel intentionally vacates an area that allows Hamas to feel like they can recoup in that area again. And then once they're recouped, Israel can strike them again, as opposed to them having melted away. That they have to feel like the Israeli army has moved away so that they can recoup before Israel can strike them again. And I would like, it's whack-a-mole, but it's whack-a-mole with a purpose. In other words, it's actually hitting the mole, as opposed to the mole just leaving. I'm not sure I buy it, but I would not even for a moment pretend that I really understand anything about military strategy, and that somehow I'm in a position to really evaluate that. Okay, but let's look at the ways that we could be engaged, that historically Jews have been engaged, now that we see what the problem is. So one way that we have been engaged is to think of Israeli Jews as part of our family. And my guess is everybody around this table at one time or another has used that metaphor, right? Why do we care about Israel? Well, now there's more than 6 million members of our family there. That's why I started with, what does it mean to be Jewish? It's this sense of belonging to a people. That's another way of saying a sense of belonging to a tribe or a set of tribes or a people, right? And so we have often felt we are connected by family. We have often felt that we are connected by belief. Now, this is a different thing, right? That we share a religious tradition. And when you travel to Israel, where do you go? You go to the religious sites. Hopefully that's not all that you go to. But it's inconceivable that a group of American Jews goes to Israel and does not visit the Western Wall. When I was doing this, some of you who went with me, I turned things over to the guide at that point because I didn't want to ruin the experience for anybody else, but I hate the Western Wall. So I don't want anything to do with the place. I call it wallatry. But I know that it's important to people and it's part of the visit, and I don't want to mess that up. So I have a conversation with the guide in advance. You're on now. Do the whole spiel. Get them to do this. I don't want to mess this up. But you go to the religious sites because we have always felt, I think American Jews have felt, whatever kind we are. Certainly Orthodox Jews feel this, but I think liberal Jews feel it also, that we share a religious tradition. We share a kind of belief tradition. Okay, family belief tradition. Now this third one that Daniel suggests is a little weird. But he says, we have also related to Israel as consumers. What does that mean as consumers? Okay. His argument, I think it's a pretty solid argument, is that in North America, essentially all Jews are Jews by choice. Meaning we don't really have to be Jewish if we don't want to. So if we do identify as Jews, it's because we want to. And part of that wanting to is, what has Judaism done for me lately? What do I get out of it? Just think about it here in terms of Temple Israel. Now, it could be radically different than when I was the senior rabbi. But one of the things that we were concerned with people maintaining their membership after their youngest child was bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. Now, maybe that's not true anymore.
We're still concerned about memberships.
What is that about? That's Judaism as consumerism. I'm happy to belong and pay when you have something I need, something I want. But once I no longer need it, I'm not thinking of you as a family. I'm not thinking of you as sharing a religious tradition. I'm thinking of you as offering me something that I need. And so the basis of our relationship is transactional. Does that make sense? That was true for a lot of American Jews with Israel. I want my kid to have a stronger Jewish identity. I'm sending him to Israel for the summer. Now, fill his head up. We did this in 1976. I mean, we had 40 high school kids for 7 weeks in Israel, which probably says something about our heads, but
We were much younger.
we were much younger, yeah, 26. but do you understand my point? That we have this notion of transaction with Israel. So, family, shared religious tradition, consumer. The fourth, which is what I think would be the ideal that we hope for, is partnership. That is, we're all part of the same people. And so we are partners with each other, different points of view, different experiences, different realities, but we partner with each other and we strengthen each other because each brings something to the table that strengthens the other. And so we're partners, right? Isn't that why you form a partnership? If you could do it all yourself, you don't need a partner. Okay, does that make sense? That there may be other ways of relating to Israel, but I think that those are four real ones that we can recognize pretty easily. Here's the problem. it's hard to make any of them work anymore. Okay, so let's start with the one that seems obvious. Family.
No. I think there's a fifth way that used to be at the top of the list, and that Israel as a refuge. Because we're old enough to have gone through the fascist regime, through Nazi Germany.
Right.
And we understand, whereas I don't think the grandchildren or great-grandchildren right now really have a basic understanding that the fact that they are genetically or heritage-wise Jewish, that they are in grave danger at any point in time that this country
All right, so
goes that way.
let me put this aside for a second to address that. First, I think that that's underneath all four of you. But one piece of me says, isn't it a great thing that our kids don't have that experience? Isn't that what we always wanted? Isn't that what we said? We wanted them to be part of America. We wanted them to be accepted. We wanted them to be different, but part, accepted. And so it's a great thing in one sense. But now, particularly in the last year or so, it feels like we were naive. We didn't do them a service. But like it's on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, the third hand, it is, I don't know how I would have convinced my kids of the problem when it was not in their experience. No matter what I would have said, I would have just seemed out of touch.
Well, I think like the third generation Cubans don't want to go back to Cuba. That's,
Yeah, the
that's
first
their
generation didn't want to go back to Cuba.
Well,
Ricky Ricardo never wanted to go back to Cuba.
but, it just as any group grows comfortable in the country,
Right,
they don't.
but so
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
don't think anybody's disagreeing with you. Okay, but it's just a little more complex, that's all. But what I'm suggesting is, and what we'll tie this in, let's look at the family issue. I want to see how I work. If we feel that we are part of a family in North America, what family is it? Is it connected to our family in Israel? Or is it connected as family to America? If we are talking about an extended family in this sense, metaphoric extended family, and you start getting American Jews to be honest, where is the strong identity?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's to America. In other words, how much extended family do you need? And yes, you can say it's easy for all of us to say, yes, we're all part of the same people. Those are our brothers and sisters in Israel. Do we really mean it? Yes.
Well, I was gonna say, if I could speak for Gary, Gary would say, there's not a Pesunik left in Ukraine. If I could, then his mother, I don't remember what her maiden name, she was born on the boat coming from Poland, and they would say, there's nobody left there. So why would you think that whole Europe is a family to us when they've all been murdered?
Well, that's correct. But up until this point here in the United States, we felt at home here. This is where our family was. I think we just have to acknowledge that. And so to build our relationship with Israel on the basis of family sounds pretty good, but I think it's actually tenuous. I'm not like that. I have zero interest in doing whatever it's called, 23andMe or Ancestry.com, or knowing anything about where in Ukraine or where in Belarus my family, I really have zero interest. Because I know who my family is. Started with Abraham and Sarah. and came, I'm completely serious. And so for me, part of the reason my blood pressure is lower in Israel than it is here, I told you this already a couple times, and it's a fact, and Simone has the same experience, is because I feel at home there. That's where my family is. They drive me insane, just like any family. And that's what's happening in the last 2 hours. It's like, yeah. But that's what family does. But they're my family. Now, do I think that I can extrapolate this out and assume that that's the way it's going to be for American Jews in general? I don't. So when I have a conversation with an American Jew who's made Aliyah, it almost always goes like this. I got off the plane and I knew. Either you get it or you don't. Now, did that make any sense to anybody here?
Oh, I never felt that.
No, you either get it or you don't. That's my point. I was having a conversation with somebody at our granddaughter's bat mitzvah, an American Jew made Aliyah in the 80s. Turns out he broke off contact with me because I don't like Netanyahu. So there was nothing politically that we had in common. However, as we were talking, I was telling him my experience in 1971 and his experience in the 1980s, and that we got off the plane and we knew that there was this connection that was going to be important for the rest of our lives. In his case, he actually made Aliyah. He changed his major. He went to Hebrew University. And in my case, I couldn't bring myself to do it, but I knew that this was going to be an important part of my life forever. And that was within minutes of getting off the plane. You either know it or you don't. Either that connection is there or not. But I don't think that we can build the relationship between North American Jewry and Israeli Jewry on this notion that, yeah, we're really all part of the same family. Does that make sense? Okay, number 2. What about the shared beliefs?
Well, they're mostly secular, so.
All right, so I would argue there's hardly any. That it was easy to see a kind of shared heritage until certain things came into high relief. And so most American Jews have been habituated to the notion of a separation between state and religion. And not only does that not exist in Israel, but the state religion is orthodoxy. Now, there's a bunch of different orthodoxies, you know, the settler orthodoxy and the ultra orthodoxy and the modern orthodoxy, and then there's shades in the middle. There's something called cabal, which are ultra orthodox that have a settler mentality, and then there's all these different shades, but it's orthodox. And we, in the majority of American Jewry, sort of are, wow. I almost went like this, but definitely, you know, it's like, no, as we go. I can dramatize this for you because I think some of you actually had this experience. What brings this into the sharpest relief for us? Women in the wall.
Oh, my.
Karen told me about
Karen,
Karen told me your experience the other day, which I sort of knew, but she gave it to me in graphic detail. So, and actually that happened pretty much every month. So, and still is going on, but with the war, it's been subdued simply because of the war. But there was a deal in 2016 that it was actually a great deal because everybody was going to compromise. We were compromising because we were going to get a newer part of the wall, actually, the southern wall. They were compromising because there was going to be a single plaza that everybody filtered through, and then you would decide which part of the wall you went to. It was really very carefully worked out over years. It was
And a joint committee.
Joint committee with everybody on it, and I have to give Natan Sharansky a lot of credit for this. I think he was a terrible politician, but he was a good head of the Jewish agency that he tried to work this all out. And it fell apart. And why did it fall apart? Because Netanyahu got pressure from the Orthodox parties about the survival of his coalition, and he simply put it in a drawer. And it never happened. But that's just an example of what I am talking about the disconnect over what we consider religious values and what is officially considered religious values in Israel. Another more political, but it still falls into this category, is criticism about the occupation. So American Jews often are very critical about the occupation, except for the Orthodox. And so this difference, again, between religious values. So I don't think that we can rely in the same way on family, and we can't rely in the same way on so-called shared beliefs. Yes.
What is the status of Reform Judaism in Israel now?
Are you
I
asking
mean,
legal
is it
status?
growing? No, is it growing in numbers or where do we stand?
I think it's very hard to answer that. All right, so if we were talking about people knowing what Reform Judaism is and having a more positive or even identification to it, I think that is growing. In terms of formal identification, if it's growing, it's very tiny.
Okay.
If you're in Israel, one way to think about living in Israel is like living in a Jewish community center 24/7. Right? Where the space has Jewish labels, has a Jewish feel, that the calendar that's being followed there is following the Jewish calendar. You get what I said? So why would you pay money to somebody to heighten that identification? All the Orthodox synagogues are free because they're supported by the government. So if you want to, so the fact that our synagogue has 80 kids a year being bar mitzvah and the families have to pay for that says something.
Wow.
However, that's a tiny little drip of the number of bar mitzvahs that are happening in Israel in any given year. Even if you take all the Reform congregations together, so it's a few hundred. You follow what I mean? So if you're looking for that kind of growth. On the other hand, where once upon a time, to say Reform Judaism was a dirty word. And there are still people in the government who want to maintain that. People like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the like. But it's not a dirty word. It used to be that we called ourselves progressive Jews in Israel. The movement is called the IMPJ, the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, because reform was a dirty word. Now everybody uses the word reform. We haven't changed the movement's name officially, but everybody uses the word reform. So there is a kind of positive growth that way. But it's an uphill thing. It's actually quite exhilarating from my perspective to be there, because what I'm about to say may irritate some people here. But I think that in the United States, Reform Judaism is simply trying to stop the slide. And in Israel, it's trying to promote the growth. It's a very different kind of experience. Each of them have major challenges, and they're difficult. But there's a very different feel watching the demographics in the United States as the Jewish community is aging and all that goes with it, versus the Jewish community in Israel, which is young and is growing and.
Fine.
Okay, so let's look at the consumer attitude. Is there a problem there? Some of you were consumers.
Oh,
You went there, or you buy Israeli products, or you. Okay. Is there a problem there? Well, I think there's a problem.
Oh. What's tourism like right now?
Oh, tourism.
nothing.
Tourism is essentially gone.
It's fine.
I figured.
But it's not just that. I think that there's consumer fatigue. Now, what I mean by that is it used to be, you see how this is all tying back to things I said at the beginning, that it was, Israeli power was a source of pride. What did American Jews do after the 6-Day War? If we had mementos of the 6-Day War, what did we have? Some of you are going to remember this. Do you remember the plates with Moshe Dayan's picture on them? Yeah. It's before you were engaged, I think.
I wasn't Jewish.
But some of you will remember this, right? That Moshe Dayan was like this American hero, American Jewish hero, right? The eye patch and the whole thing. He was actually a rogue in many ways. There's a story that he lost his eye actually stealing antiquities off of an archaeological site that he shouldn't have been on. But you remember all that. You remember the pictures, the iconic picture of the Israeli soldiers at the Western Wall. You remember that? The soldiers there, one of the people in the picture just recently died. The Israeli power was a source of consumer pride, if you will. Because look at them, look what they were able to do. I would say that held without any dings through 73. 73 dinged it with the Yom Kippur War, but then Entebbe sort of brought it back in 76. But since 82, that has been diminishing. And
The whole startup nation is the way of dealing with that. That the pride in the startup nation created the consumerism again, because it wasn't Israeli power with the army, it was now their power in high tech and Nobel Prizes and all that is just another part of that. And that
you're suggesting it's a replacement, and I agree. And why did we need that replacement? Because now Israeli military power is the problem that is leading to the divide, which is what we were saying an hour ago, that what is producing this tension is the great Israeli military power and how it is being used. One side or the other, either appropriately, inappropriately, sometimes not appropriately, but it's that power, right? And so you'll even hear extreme versions of this. Maybe it wasn't such a great thing in 67 that we won the way we did. David Ben-Gurion had his doubts. Taking the West Bank, he saw as down the line going to be a problem. Well, and so even this notion of consumerism, that you have something there that we want, is also a question. So what about the fourth one? Partnership. How's that doing? What do you think? Does anybody here at the table feel in partnership with the Jewish state? I do, but I think what you're describing is more the norm.
Say that again.
Does anyone here feel in partnership with the Jewish state? That it's a partnership, that we're contributing to their betterment and well-being as Jews, and they're contributing to ours?
Never thought of it that way. I don't know. I thought I could say that I'm a partner. It's just I'm a backer.
A backer.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a kind of partnership?
It is. It is.
It's an interesting
It's
way
not
to
an
put it.
equal, it's not an equal partnership, but they have my back. I mean, I have their back. Much as it's worth.
Okay, so do we see where the way you just put it is very helpful to me, because do we see where the problem is? If you were an Israeli, would you be feeling right now that the American Jewish community has its back?
I hope so.
Not as much.
It's sort of a mixed bag,
Yeah.
isn't it?
On one hand, yes, on another hand, no.
Okay.
And even before the war, I mean, that with the way the
Oh,
government.
as I said, we could have had this
Right.
conversation in 2021. The last time there was a short war in 2021 with Gaza, but it raised all of these subjects, every one of them. It's just now the subjects are so in our face that I don't think that we can avoid the discussion. I would argue that Israelis are very unsure who has their back. This is partly why Israelis overwhelmingly want Trump to win today.
Why do they feel he has their back?
Because he lies.
First of all, I think it's idiocy that they do. And I want to say that clearly. However, from their perspective, they see his time. I think it was all show. Moving the embassy, recognizing the Golan Heights. However, the Abraham Accords were not show. They were big time important, or as he might say, bigly important. Okay, we have to be honest. And so Israelis think during that time, they also think that Joe Biden has their back, by and large. As the war drags on and the tension with Netanyahu becomes more and more evident, there's movement in this. But certainly early on, for the first 6 months, there was no doubt about it. There is serious question from their perspective as to whether Kamala Harris has their back. That's the way they're viewing it. And that's not our subject today. But they have the same question about liberal Jews. Do liberal Jews really have our back from their perspective? Now, I'm going to have much more to say about that in a couple minutes. So I don't want to jump the gun.
I think a lot of the problem is Netanyahu.
Yeah, I think all of the problems is Netanyahu, but
I mean, I would like to be a lot better partner with someone different in the running it.
which what I have written down here, Peggy, see on the quote, my own writing. Hard to partner with this government.
Well, the one thing that keeps striking me is that you talk about the power imbalance between, and there is, but in truth, Israel doesn't have that strong of a defense system. Without the aid of the United States and perhaps Britain and France, it would run out of ammunition, et cetera.
Well, and it does
And
manufacture
so-
stuff itself, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it really, not the gorilla in the room that everybody thinks it is. It is in the short term, but not in the.
Israel is designed to fight short wars. All of it. The small standing army with the big reserve army. You're not supposed to, in Israel, you're not supposed to fight a war for 18 months. I mean, it's 18 days. Look at this, the 6-day war was 6 days, right? Who's burying grants to? The 6-day war is the 6 days. The Yom Kippur War, 3 weeks. You're absolutely correct. But in the region, given what you just said, Israel is still the 600-pound gorilla compared to who the neighbors are, the neighbor. We now know, if we had any doubts, that Iran has no air defense at all. Israel flew around there for 4 hours over Iran last week, taking out military targets without any opposition. How is that possible?
I don't know, it's almost comical.
So there's lots that we don't know, but your point is very well taken. I would argue, though, even the United States must have partners in its defense.
And that is a problem with Israelis, is they like to say, we can do it alone.
No, we have to be able to do it.
We have to be able to do it, and it's not feasible. It's just ridiculous.
That's the whole thing of total victory. We have to be able to do this alone. And even people who, like when he was prime minister, I admired Naftali Bennett, but he says these things also. The whole right wing in Israel says these, which is more than half the country. And it's because of the fear of what you just said. We have to be able to do this alone because we can't rely on any of these others. Okay. Number one, it's hard to partner with this government. Number two, I don't believe that Israel ever acknowledged us here as actual partners. The North American Jewish community. They saw us as backers, but not as partners.
And money.
And it used to be, I don't think I'm telling stories out of school, Israelis wanted federations to give them money and then just trust them with it. That started to change about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It doesn't happen anymore because it was this same notion. You tell your Dutch uncle whatever he needs to hear, but we actually know better. They're just backers. They're our source. And I believe that's a very big problem. It was just one more sentence and then. Right now in Israel, given everything that we just said, it's like we don't really want to listen to self-appointed partners. I mean, we have enough going on. The world is against us, right? Or you can argue it, we have our own prosperity now. We don't need the backers. We don't need the Dutch uncle. So why should we have to take on the burden of listening to partners? Do you sort of follow what I'm getting at? Okay, Felix.
I think that for the Israelis' point of view, and tell me if that's wrong, it's an existential threat. Everything is an existential threat. Many people came, previous generations, from the Holocaust.
Or from Arab countries.
The only way, or came before the Holocaust and said, we just have to fight back.
That's correct.
That does not exist in the mentality of an American Jew.
That is correct.
So that's totally different.
I agree with that. But that doesn't mean that it isn't problematic. What is problematic is that the correct approach, or is the need for partnership, to recognize that we need partners and need to cultivate that, the better approach? I agree with your psychological analysis. I think that's exact. I would add to it, it's not just the survivors of the Holocaust or pre-Holocaust. It's also all these people from the Arab countries who were
exposed.
Well, they were exposed, but they were held down before they were, and then they were thrown out. And they have no trust at all for the Arab community. None at all. So what I'm getting at is the historical ways of the easy historical ways of relating to Israel aren't easy anymore, and maybe not working at all. Each one of them works for some people. So some people who feel a strong relation to Israel feel it as family. Some people feel it through religion. Some feel it because they think they're still getting a good deal. They're sort of consuming and they like it. And some feel it because it's partnership or some combination or all of the above. But for many, it's not working anymore. And I think that it's time that we acknowledge it. Now, we can't control them there, although if I was ever being asked to talk about this there, which I would find very hard to do in Hebrew, but if I was being asked to do it, I would be saying the same thing in reverse, that it's time now for us in Israel to start to think in terms of this relationship a little differently and try to cultivate this. So I would argue, if we want to look at it politically, sort of the way Aaron has been looking at it, Is it more important to build more bomb factories so you can say you're more independent? Or is it more important to build a relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Relationship.
Is it more important, to build, like Israel takes like the Merkava tank, right? You're familiar with this, or they have a rifle that's called the Galil. I don't think they're using it anymore. But the Galil was an M16 that they modified. That every one of the American planes that Israel gets, it modifies. They're never exactly what comes. So an F-16, an F-15, I don't think they fly F-14s except for as training missions anymore. The F-35s are all modified. Okay, that's one way to go, and it's necessary. But ending the war with the Sunnis, getting all of the Gulf states, except for Iran on the other side of the Gulf, on board as in an alliance working against Iran, the octopus with all its tentacles, that seems to me to be a better approach. Politically, the same thing is true in terms of the relationship between Israeli Jews and American Jews. Fostering a kind of mutual recognition that we aren't the same, we aren't going to agree, our experiences are different, but we need to find ways to bridge these gaps because we're still better off together than apart. Seems to me a better way to go. Very hard to do. Okay, so now I want to talk.
Okay, is there anybody trying to do that?
I think that there are people trying to do that. So it's what Daniel Hartman devotes his entire institute to. That's why he does these summer programs where rabbis come. There's an equivalent program for Christian ministers. There's an equivalent program for Muslim imams. There is an equivalent program for lay leaders that he's running all summer, trying to establish through the study of Torah, bridging the gaps. Because study is a remarkably good way to bridge these gaps. Because we can all say, these are our texts. You read them this way, you read them this way, but we can all study them because they're all our texts. Okay, now I know that Karen talked about this during her High Holiday sermon. On Rosh Hashanah, I think it was on Rosh Hashanah. Maybe it was Kol Nidre. How do I know? She sent me the sermon and I read it. She also sent me the link so I could watch it, but I read it. Okay, so if she was here, I'd tell her I was happy to read it. I'm not watching any more sermons right now. But I don't know that it came across, because this is actually pretty complicated, what I'm going to try to describe. And she was trying to do it in a sermon, and everything she said was exactly accurate. I don't have any complaints with any of it. But let me see if I can flesh it out a little. So, how does the current relationship between liberal North American Jews in Israel work? And liberal here can mean reform, conservative, reconstructionist, renewal, even modern Orthodox. Anybody who recognizes pluralism. So, Daniel, as a philosopher, loves to come up with labels. It's a big thing that philosophers do. If you can label something, now I understand it. Right, so everybody knows that Martin Luther talked about I, thou, and I, it. About 1% of those people understand what I, thou, and I, it is, but they all know he said that and that those were his labels of how he understood human experience. Okay, so Daniel has 4 categories, which Karen talked about. He talks about the untroubled committed. Is this sounding familiar? The untroubled uncommitted, the troubled committed, and the troubled uncommitted. Sort of trips off the tongue, but they're sort of complicated. Who are the untroubled committed? These are American Jews who believe essentially Israel right or wrong. We support Israel no matter what it does, and if we raise any questions, we're really not committed. That our job, I love your term here, so our job is to be total backers. without any ambiguity and no question marks, nothing. We're complete backers, and anything else makes us not committed. If we're committed, we are untroubled. Okay? That one's pretty easy.
Like that about anything.
I'm sorry?
What are Jews like that about?
There are Jews like
There are
this
Jews
about,
like that.
there are Jews like about this. And you're old enough that you remember this during Vietnam, here in the American equivalent. America, right or wrong. You remember this, that if you're raising questions, if you're troubled, get out of here. If you don't like it, the exact phrase was love it or leave it. And
I mean,
we remember this, right? I mean, it was part of our formative understanding. I think it just goes with the territory. There is always that slice who think that way. Okay, then there is the untroubled, uncommitted. They're untroubled because Israel's not on the radar screen. It's not on their radar screen. Daniil would never use that phrase. That's my
Or
phrase.
maybe they've given up, you know?
They may have given up, but it's either was never on the radar screen or it's no longer on the radar screen. But as far as they're concerned, they may actually even say, yes, I have family there, meaning they recognize the connection. Yes, there's a connection between Jews, but Israel as a political entity, as a nation state, is no longer relevant as far as I'm concerned. That's what an untroubled, uncommitted person is saying. Neither of those categories has a problem. Both of them are untroubled. For them, the Israel relationship is clearly foundational without any question marks, or is not foundational without any question mark. Okay, it's the middle, it's the next two that are important. The one that really matters, and this is what Karen was focusing on, he calls the troubled committed. Which means that's where he puts himself. That's where I put myself. Simone puts herself there too, which is we are committed. Look, we are dedicating big chunks of our time and our resources to living in Israel when we do not have to. That is because we are committed to the project, to what it means, that this is the greatest thing in Jewish life in 2,000 years, and I want to be part of it, literally, day to day. So being committed isn't the issue. But I'm also terribly troubled by this project. I'm troubled by what goes on in the West Bank. I am troubled by the problems. Let me give you an example. Troubled by the ultra-nationalists. I am troubled by the ultra-Orthodox. I am troubled by the human rights which are not consistently applied. I am troubled by the fact that I think Israel could be doing more to pursue peace. I am troubled by the fact that Israel has become used to its moral problems. I am troubled by the fact, put simply, that it's not always trying to do better. So I am very troubled. However, if we were talking about the United States of America and not Israel, I would have said all those same things. I wouldn't have been ultra-Orthodox. It would have been maybe Christian nationalists, and it would have been the ultra-nationalists, and it would have been that American civil rights are not being applied equally, and right. All that we would, I think, probably for everybody at this table, we would all say the same thing, that we are committed Americans, but that we are troubled by many aspects of American life. Okay, and then there's the troubled uncommitted. This is what you were talking about, where it's fallen off the radar screen. They've become so troubled that they're uncommitted, that they don't see the upside. They don't see the positive. Okay, I don't think that there's much that we can do with the untroubled committed. They are going to be who they are vis-a-vis Israel, and they are going to yell at the rest of us for not being sufficiently committed. I don't see a way to change that dynamic because of their commitments and the way they are. I don't see any point, not much point anyway, with the untroubled, uncommitted. I think that we need to engage them, particularly if they're young people. I don't want to give up on young people. But somebody my age who's untroubled and uncommitted, what? In terms of troubled, uncommitted, there might be some conversation to be had there, depending on what specifically it was about the trouble that led them to be uncommitted. Like, if it's the way Reformed Jews are treated in Israel, there might be room to talk there.
Or
If they're
women.
open. What?
Or women.
Yeah, or women. Or Mediterranean Jews called Edota Mizrach. There's that whole issue too. There's all the issues depending on what it is.
Ethiopians or the Arabs,
Ethiopians or
Israelis.
immigrants or
the Russians,
without knowing what the specific is that caused them to Israel to fall off the radar screen, it's hard to know, but there might be some. But what really matters, I think, is the troubled committed, which I think most North American Jews fall into that category. Okay, so what are we going to do about that?
Therein lies the rub.
Yeah, but should
As
we?
someone once said, yes.
Is it our business to do anything about it?
Oh, I think it is
Think
if
so?
we care about bridging this gap. That's why I started where I did. I'm starting from the assumption that Zionism is important, if not crucial, for North American Jewry. Just as North American Jewry is important, if not crucial, for Israeli Jewry. How many Jews are there in the world? You know, we talk as if we're so big. I'm guessing 15 million, maybe 16 million, 6 million roughly in the United States, 7 million, maybe that number is growing because there's a whole lot more Jewish children in Israel than there are here. Non-Orthodox Israelis have 3, 4, 5 kids. So that accounts for 13 plus million. And the remaining 2 million, 2.5 million are in all the rest of the world.
I don't think there's that many.
If, whatever, there may be 500,000 in France, there's a couple 100,000 in England. What did you say are in Sweden? 20,000. There's some in there's still some in South Africa, in Australia. There's still Jewish communities in places like Argentina and Brazil. But all together, we're talking about all of it, all together, less than New York. So it seems to me that there's a compelling case to be made why Israel needs the diaspora. If nothing else, as a source of ideas about Judaism, but experience to counter some of the claustrophobic ideas that exist in Israel. So Daniel has proposed a 5-point plan. Let's see what you think. He thinks this should be the liberal Zionist agenda. North American liberal Zionist agenda. Number 1. And he thinks that this is bedrock. The Jewish people has a right to sovereignty within the land of Israel. You notice he didn't say all of the land of Israel. He didn't say the land of Israel, within the land of Israel. In other words, the notion that Israel, among all the nations in the world, has to justify its very existence. Does anybody ask the Portuguese to explain why they deserve to have a state? No matter what they do, remember the whole colonial history of the Portuguese? or Spain or France. Nobody says to any other country that I'm aware of, You have to justify your existence. You shouldn't exist. But that is what's happening today with the state of Israel. So he says we have to start as liberal Zionists with Israel's right to sovereignty within the land of Israel. A commitment, we should have a commitment to Israel's physical, moral, spiritual well-being, and we should be partners with Israel in the Zionist project as central to Jewish life. He thinks that's number one. It was a lot in number one. You notice he focused in on partnership. Israel has a right to exist. We have a right to be Israel's partners, and Israel needs to recognize that as diaspora Jews. Because Israel is not just the state of Israelis, it is also the state of Jews. It is the Jewish state that Theodor Herzl wrote, Judenstaat. If you think just about Israelis, the reason it's the state of Israelis is 20%, well, at least 10%, somewhere between 10 and 20% are not Jews who are Israeli citizens. But the whole notion of the state is that this state stands for the worldwide Jewish community. Questions about what his point is? We can talk about it in terms of all five, but once I get to it. Number two, I love this. Jewish power is a gift and a responsibility. What happened when Jews did not have physical power?
Nothing good.
Externally.
The worst is the Shoah, right? Yeah. But there's plenty of examples. We do not have to just focus on that, although for convenience sake, it's the easiest way to deal with this. But we know what happens when Jews rely on the kindness of strangers, as Blanche Dubois once said. Right? In the Streetcar Named Desire. When Jews depend upon the largesse of their host countries, even when it goes well, even for a few centuries, like in Spain, ultimately ends up in the Inquisition, or it ends up in the Shoah, or it ends up in expulsions, right? Okay, so he wants to make the case that Jewish power, and he means physical power, hard power, as well as soft power, but hard power is a gift. We need it, but it is also a responsibility, because we have to use it appropriately. So his argument would be, you fight just wars, but you fight just wars justly. That's a very heavy burden to fight just wars. It's much easier to find a just war than to ask yourself, are we fighting it justly? That's why I think all of that is in the word responsibility. Okay, Israel has a right to exist. It should be a partnership with worldwide Jewry. Power is a gift and a responsibility. Number three, it should be our responsibility in diaspora to defend Israel, but to have the right to criticize Israel in pursuit of Israel as it should be.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Do we think that we have the right to criticize?
I don't think I have the
I think you do.
right. Yeah, I'm concerned, but I don't think I can tell them what to do.
That's not
I'm
the same.
care.
That's not the same.
Yeah, well,
First of all, they're not going to listen to us telling them
That's
what to
true.
do. Just like we're not going to listen to them telling us what to do. However, criticism, I think the argument here is, if you have no critics, you end up untroubled committed.
We end up with not met God.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that we have a responsibility to be responsible critics. So I've been trying to convince people on this side that you can be supporters of Israel without being supporters of this government.
Oh, yeah, well, the people are not the government.
The country is not
Not
the
the
government.
government.
Right, the country, yeah.
Does that make sense? I have felt this way many times in my life as an American, where I supported the country, but not the government. And I'm a little worried about tomorrow. But
Yeah, me too.
do you, I'm actually a lot worried about tomorrow, but do you understand my point? And so he is arguing that it is diaspora Jewry's responsibility to responsibly be critics. To say we have a point of view that you should listen to. That's not the same thing as saying that you should obey, but you should listen to it because we have experience you don't have. We are part of the family. We are part of the religion. You should at least listen.
But, okay, even though President Biden is not Jewish, he tried to say something to Netanyahu about watch where you're stepping, have a plan B.
Yes.
Think about this.
And he was correct.
He was absolutely correct. And
What he was incorrect about was not understanding the psychology. It's like, I said this before, I think a couple of weeks ago, it's maybe the first week, that it would have been like saying on September 12th, don't attack.
Yeah.
That there was a pretty good argument, particularly from hindsight, that Afghanistan can be a quagmire. You know what the history of Afghanistan was? The place where empires go to die. That was not an American thing that was invented. That was throughout history. You go to Afghanistan, the Persians, if you need an example, the Russians in the 1980s.
Yeah.
The
British.
The British, it's the place you go to die, to kill your empire. So it would have been good advice. But there was no chance that America was going to listen to it.
Yeah.
And that was and I think even Joe Biden knew that at the time. He was trying to say something that he knew made sense. But okay, what I'm getting at here though, is that criticism is necessary. I think it's necessary for any society. It is necessary for any people. It is necessary for any nation. Otherwise, you end up with my nation, right or wrong, love it or leave it, untroubled, committed. Or people just tune out entirely. Okay. So
Can I just say one thing? I don't live there, so I can't tell them what's best for them.
You can tell them what, from your point of view,
Yeah, that's
you would
how I
like
could do
them
it.
to consider.
Yeah.
If you want to tell them what to do, move to Israel and vote.
You're right.
Okay, I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting, and I think Daniil is correct, is that we have a point of view that they may not have from our experience here. And that point of view is valuable. And so they should be listening to it. They have a point of view that we may not have.
Maybe we should use your words. Maybe we should be engaging with them.
Exactly. And so we should be listening to it. Okay. Number 4. All people are created b'tselem Elohim. All people are created in the image of God. And that has to be respected as part of our Zionism. No racism.
Right. That's hard.
It's very hard for every country. It's no surprise to me that Israel has to deal with racism. Can you find me a country that doesn't deal with racism or ethnic cleansing or some version of it? They don't exist. Everybody has to deal with this. What do they call it here in the United States? The original sin of the United States is racism, whether we're talking about Native Americans or African Americans. Okay, so he has a couple specifics that are from the last 2 years. It means that Israel has to have a strong judiciary, which is what Netanyahu's government is trying to destroy. And it also means that Israel has to eventually recognize religious pluralism, which is what those of us who are in liberal Judaism in Israel are all working at every day in little minute ways, but just kind of like the ants, digging away in the ant farm, trying to create new pathways. And then he thinks that the fifth piece of North American liberal Zionist agenda should be working to end the occupation towards peace. Now, that's a very big political statement.
Yes.
Because there are plenty of North American Jews, as well as Israeli Jews, that think that the occupation is just one step to the annexation. Because God gave the land to us, as Pat Bowman taught us.
Question, going back to the second session on the religious right. Is that primarily Sephardic, or is
No.
it a mixture of Ashkenazic and?
No, it's both. And it's very full of North American Jews who have made Aliyah to the West Bank. You can go to settlements in the West Bank and hear more English than Hebrew.
I was sitting.
New York English.
No, I was sitting, coming back here with a young couple who live in, Beit Shemesh. No, they live in Beitar Illit, and, which is an ultra-Orthodox settlement just over the line in the
Well,
West
it's an
Bank,
ultra-Orthodox city over the Green Line.
over the Green Line. And we were talking, she wanted to know how much Hebrew and I said, I do, where I live, and she said, that's the problem living where we live, it's all Americans. She said, learning Hebrew is almost impossible because nobody's speaking Hebrew. In her whole neighborhood of Beitar Illit, there, she said she could count the Israelis, meaning natives, on two hands.
So it's,
So why is she there?
It's all in English there.
they speak English.
What
Well, I
about the
know, but
schools?
why is she there if she doesn't?
Oh,
work
this is
there?
part of the religious
It's part of
connection.
the religious
She's
connection.
in number 2. Moving to Israel for the religious tradition, right? That this is what Jews do. We have the opportunity to live in Israel and to live a completely Jewish life, in the promised land. How do we not do it? That would be her.
Well, I have a question. The schools, do the schools teach your kids Hebrew? Are
Oh,
the
I'm sure
schools
they
in
do.
Hebrew?
I'm sure they
So the
do.
next generation,
The problem
Yeah.
is that in an ultra-Orthodox city, they
There's-
have their own schools. It's
Yeah.
not the Israeli
And they may
schools.
be teaching them in Yiddish and not.
They may be
Hebrew.
teaching Yiddish,
I think they do Hebrew there, she said. They're not a Yiddish speaking community.
but there's several school systems in Israel.
Yeah.
There's the secular school system, there's the religious school system, there's the ultra-Orthodox school system. The settlers more or less have their own school system. And so you can't just say, well, the schools will take care of this, because they may or they may not. So what do we think of this agenda? Could we build our liberal Zionist relationship out of this agenda? Israel has a right to exist. Jewish power is a gift, meaning we approve of the Israeli army as an army, but we have to have responsibility, that we have to have the right to criticize. Is not the same as order to tell, but to offer an alternative point of view, that we have to recognize all of Israel's citizens as human beings with rights, and that we have to be pursuing peace with the ultimate goal of ending the occupation of another people.
I think that's a good stride.
They're remember, this is only a statement of what we want, not what we believe we're necessarily going to achieve in our lifetime, but what our Zionism would be, what we want, what we promote, what we would tell the kids is our Zionism, including the right to criticize, including the problems that we see, the fact that we are troubled. You see, I think that the kids only see the untroubled committed. Karen, to her credit, by the way, I'm happy whoever seems to me that the rabbis of Temple Israel, and I do not consider myself actively one of them, have been working very hard on this issue and doing really good work. Tina's last piece I thought was terrific. And it was, what, you know, in the weekly email.
What about voting? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
Oh, yeah,
I
that
like
would
it.
be
Mhm. Can I
Yeah,
have a question? And I didn't mean to ask Karen this, and I just haven't had a moment, but that sermon, I mean, what I got at the end was, you know, we all need to vote in the,
in the World Zionist
Right.
election.
and my question.
That's what I was going to come to
Oh.
next, but yeah.
Okay, all right, well, the question is, and so you're gonna cover it, then how influential is that really?
It is.
Well, okay, so is he going to flip everything over? No.
But-
However, the best way I think we can express this agenda is by supporting our movement in Israel. Now, we support our movement in Israel with our time and energy and our bodies and some of our money. Even if all of us did that. If we win the World Zionist election and have the strongest voice in the World Zionist Congress, half the delegates come from the United States, roughly. Okay. So if we win and have the majority of the American delegates, or even more, it means that translates into power in the World Zionist Congress. In the World Zionist Congress, there are departments and there are jobs that filter money into Israeli society, which means if we have control of those departments and jobs, that money goes into our movement, between $2 and $3 million a year.
So how difficult is that, the idea to get largest?
We've had it for the last 4 or 5 times.
Oh, okay.
Since 1997, I know, but I think 1992.
We were both delegate. Well, I was a delegate and you were
I was
working
working for it.
for ARTSA at this. It does matter in a concrete way. So in other words, if we have control of some of the money that is going into diaspora affairs, for example, through the Jewish Agency, that can be a positive with our congregations who then become agents and are spending that money. So winning it has a definite impact. It's for real. Is it going to change the government? Is it going to all of a sudden make it a pluralistic society in a way that we want to see? No, but it's like what I was saying about being the ant who never gives up, who keeps working. We have made huge progress in the 50 years I've been playing on this. There was 2 or 3, maybe 4 Reform congregations in Israel when I first went. There was Hebrew Union College. There was one other in Jerusalem. There was one in Haifa. And they were talking about one in the Tel Aviv area. Now there's 50 or 60. Now, that's nothing compared to the number of synagogues in Israel, but it's tremendous growth. There are 10% of Israelis who in surveys will say they identify to the Reform movement. They're not giving us any money or time, but they will say they identify to the Reform movement, which may mean they want their kid to be bar mitzvah with us, or they want to get married with a Reform rabbi, or they ask a Reform rabbi to do their mother's funeral. Now, is that something? It is. It's just slow, sure kind of progress. So it is something that you can really do, and it's really easy to do. It'll cost you a few bucks to register for the election, and then you'll vote online.
When is that?
Yeah,
I think it'll be March.
and we'll be made aware, I'm hoping.
Oh, yeah. It used to be
Okay,
$7.
okay.
But before that, I remember when it was $2. But it'll be something like $7. And what it to really do it right, in my opinion, now this is just me, it means that Temple Israel would have 3 or 4 captains who would identify each 25 people who could vote in this, so that Temple Israel would produce at least 100 or 200 votes for the World Zionist Congress, and would you call it a ground game? You know, the whole thing that's supposed to be Kamala Harris's advantage in this. You know how this works. Have you voted yet? Is there a problem? If you come on Sunday morning to religious school, we'll have 3 computers in the library, and we'll help you do it. You know that kind of stuff. Imagine if the American Reform movement all does that. We'll win, and we'll have, if there's 100,000 votes total, which is sad to say that's what it's likely to be. If there's 100,000 votes and we have 50,000 of them, We're gonna have half of the American delegation, which means we're gonna have probably a little more than a quarter of the delegates in the entire town. We will have some Israeli allies
We are in,
who will work together with us. So put it together, it'll be a third, maybe 40% of the whole conference will be pulling in the same line. One of the Labor Knesset members is the former director of the Reform Movement in Israel. His name is Gilad Karib. If he is a delegate to this, he's going to be working with the Reform Movement.
well, in the past, I don't know if it's this time, but everyone before, we have been in coalition with labor.
With labor. So that's who he's with. So it's an opportunity for you to influence, not to dictate, as a kind of partnership. And to ignore that is to ignore where we can have some influence. And it's so easy. I think that the World Zionist is something like in April or May, and so the election will
It
be
starts in
March.
January, I think.
I don't know when it'll start, but I think that it'll end sometime in March.
Yeah, it'll end in March.
And then the delegate, and all you do is like 120 names or something like that. And then you vote for the arts and slate. And depending on what the percentage that arts it gets, that's how far they're on the list, the number of delegates.
Okay, so practically, what do? We get online, we go to a website?
Yeah, it'll be a website.
Okay, what website would that be?
The one we put in tidbits and
It'll
on
be,
the website. and-
they'll tell you,
Yeah.
I don't think it's been constructed yet.
Well,
Because
then
it's-
I mean,
it's
to
November.
register.
It's
No,
not
that,
there
it
yet.
hasn't been done yet.
Oh, okay.
I think it's
It'll
going to
all
open
happen
after the
after-
first of
I think
January.
after
Oh,
January.
okay,
And the World Zionist Congress is supposed to happen every 5 years.
okay.
It's the parliament of the Jewish people. It is
Yeah,
what
I remember doing that.
Theodore Herzl started in 1896,
97.
97. That was
96
the
maybe.
96. That was the first World Zionist Congress in Basel. And it's been happening ever since. It's an experience once. I mean, I was a delegate once, a year that was. It's like being a spear carrier on stage because you're part of a list, right? And so the person who's at the head of the list, who's the coalition director, is working on some wording or some trying to make a deal with somebody. You get this and I get this, and then they tell us this is how we're voting, and you vote. So,
The next American election for the 39th World Zionist Congress is scheduled to be held between March 10th and May 4th.
Okay,
Okay,
Okay.
so it'll probably be, the conference itself will probably be next summer. That would be my guess, May or June, something like that. But you can really do this. And what I would encourage you is to see it as part of the Zionist agenda, your personal Zionist agenda. And so therefore, you want to get out the vote. Okay,
That's one thing we can do. What else?
well,
I mean, those are great goals, but does that boil down to what action?
okay, so in terms of actions, I think it means, it's a great question, and I haven't thought about it enough, so I want to be honest about that. But what we tend to do is to farm this out, meaning we simply know federations have some sort of relationship with Israel, so therefore we just leave it to them. Or you know that your Rabbi Emeritus lives in Israel and he's arguing for these kind of things effectively or ineffectively. And so, okay, that's what I think is it involves. So I would hope that you would work on a relationship with the IMPJ, with the Reform Movement in Israel. Not just a financial relationship, but they're sending people here for one reason or another all the time. Get them to come here. Get them to speak. It works. So when you had Leslie, what is Leslie's last name from Women of the Wall?
Yeah.
Why can't I remember her last name? We see her fairly frequent. She's still
regularly.
active. She's not doing that anymore, but she's retired. But
We just saw her.
We just saw- we saw her in Tel Aviv at Hostage Square during a demonstration. Do you remember how that worked? You had a lot of people here, if I'm remembering.
Yes,
right.
yes, we did.
Yeah.
Okay, and what was she saying to you? She was saying, we need your support because this is part of the relationship. Now, she was looking for every kind of support. Yeah, she was hoping you were gonna buy some Tolesa and which you did
sure
and all.
did.
You know. But that can happen with every movement. I have sort of a thing that I have a kind of dream about, which is not organized yet, so I can't make it happen. Okay, so I'm saying that in advance, don't ask me. We're close with the rabbis in our congregation. So one of them, who I've told you about, his name is David Azulai. His mother is Yemenite and his father is Moroccan. This is not your standard Reform Jew in Israel. He grew up in an Orthodox kibbutz. He found his way first to the conservative movement where he got a master's, and then to the Reform movement where he became a Reform rabbi. He's a very, very interesting guy and very talented. He's his father's Moroccan and his mother's Yemenite. He has no Anglo background at all. He's the guy I tutored in English. He's considered it his mission to enrich Reform Judaism in Israel by bringing Mizrahi music into the Reform movement. So not just Eastern European melodies for prayer, but Moroccan melodies for prayer. He does Kiddush in a Moroccan melody, which if he's doing it, I can do it with him. He sent me a link so that I could learn it, and I've just never learned it. It's very hard to unlearn Kiddush and to learn it. I can in another melody, but he's succeeding in our congregation. We're now doing a Moroccan melody. Yeah, imagine that. That could happen here too. He has a band. And I would love it if he would do a tour in the United States. He would love it too. But getting that set up, assuming that we can ever get it, having him come here and talk to you about his background and to do some of this Moroccan or Yemenite music and how this is an enriching from the Israeli perspective. I don't know that it would work here at all. Almost all American Jews come from Eastern or Central Europe. You know, so whether we would actually be able to listen to it and see it as, oh yeah, that's interesting, let's do more of that. But his story is really, really interesting. Those kind of things can be done. And the reverse. And that's why I said I know that Temple Israel is trying to do that. It's brought people to Israel during very difficult times. Hopefully, not just to Kfar Aza, as important as that is because of the war. It's really important. But also to the Reform. We did not do enough of that on our trip. We did it. Remember when we went to Hoda Sharon and we had dinner with that congregation, remember? Yeah, that's where our grandson is right now, in a building right next to that on that campus. And that was, I think, a great Friday night. But pretty much that was our only contact to the Reform movement in Israel.
What was the name of the rabbi?
Mickey Boyd. Might you still have him in your phone?
He's retired.
He's retired. I think he's retired or he's retired.
That's the guy whose dad
There's
is
a lot of- on
Moroccan?
YouTube.
No, this is.
Our guy, his name is David Azulai.
Okay, I said, boy, it's a real Moroccan name.
No, Azulai is the most common last name in Israel.
Really?
It's the Smith of Israel.
It's like Smith
Drums.
or Patel if you're in the subcontinent, or it's so Azulai is very, very common. It's very, very common. Park in Korea, but he's a very, very interesting guy, and he believes, I convinced him, but he didn't take much convincing, that it's important that there be a relationship between Israeli Reform Jewry and American Reform Jewry. And he knew he had to have English to do that. And his English was only school English, which is okay, but you don't have much confidence, you know? And so periodically, if he has a presentation to make, he asks me to go over it with him to make sure he's not saying, I know how he feels, you know, if I slip up on one letter in Hebrew, I may be talking about a porcupine instead of a table, you know? It's easy, you know, to mess these kinds of things up. And so he's at least understands that he's got somebody he can check it all out with. So that's what I do. But there's those kind of things that I think you can do. I don't know, I'm sure that if I think about it some more, I'll come up with some other kinds of things. I'm sure that this is a spam call.
There's a lot of Jewish Moroccan music.
Suspected spam call. Come on, stop.
I get lots of those.
Yeah.
I can't even get rid of it. Okay.
It's called Israeli dark.
Really?
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did that last day, and I think, wait,
Did you go to the?
Is this one party
the
or what?
last night
I said that
with,
Israel
Rabbi,
is
Rabbi
covered by
Miguel about the-
I did.
Well, that's about
I
his
signed up, but I couldn't
That's
get
about
into
his sentence.
the-
So let me just finish, because we're at the end of our time anyway.
you're gonna behave.
I appreciated that you wanted to hear this and to think about it, because these are not easy things to think about.
He's an
It's not
interesting guy,
like
his presentation.
Just reading a midrash and then riffing on it, which, as important as that is, and I think it's very important to actually think about this kind of subject, including very difficult pieces of it that have to do with the war and how Israelis are feeling and how our kids are feeling and how maybe we can proceed. I think I'm really happy you wanted to do it, and I was glad that we could make this happen. Thank you very much.
Yeah. When do you have, yes, sir?
If the planes fly a week from Friday.
have a question when you talk about young people. What are your children?
Our children are not necessarily typical. So our children, I think, would all, for certain, our youngest child, who we just had these conversations with in the last 2 days, but I think all three of them clearly fall into the troubled, committed category. They understand that they're completely committed, but they're not untroubled committed.
Our
They're
oldest
great.
grandson is spending a semester in Israel in school
And-
right now.
And I think I said this at the brunch, when asked, are you sure, his name is Nadav, are you sure you want to go? I mean, it's a war.
Yeah.
And he said to his mother quoted him on this to us, Mom, you're the one that has told us there's never a good time to go to Israel. There's always something that will keep you from going if you're going to let it. And I'm not going to let it. This is my chance and I'm going to do it. And he did. He's having a great time.
How long is he there for?
4 months. He's gonna stay 2 weeks longer with us, because he doesn't start school until the middle of January, and he finishes, he's got 2 or 3 weeks, so he's going to stay with us. But that's an attitude. Does it mean that he is untroubled, committed? I doubt it, knowing my grandson. I'm sure he understands all of the problems. And he's only 16. And who knows what happens when he falls under the influence in a university. Because a lot of this has to do with peer kind of stuff.
And not being told the truth. I mean, they're getting a lot of propaganda on the campuses.
There's no doubt about that. But as a tactic, as soon as
Yeah.
you say, you're listening to propaganda and not the truth, they
That's
say,
shut down.
you've been feeding me propaganda my whole life and not the truth.
Yeah.
That's what happens. See, I tend, engagement is better than argument. I want you to listen to my point of view because I'm committing to listening to your point of view. People don't like this. All right, so when I was here, nobody's getting up and running away, so I will tell you this, but I hate keeping Tina here for. Okay,
I'm happy.
so I don't think any of you will remember, but you might remember when he was organizing Darryl Fairchild. He has been a city commissioner, councilman for several years now, but we were very good friends. And he was organizing, before I was even organizing with him, with Lift Greater Dayton.
Yes.
He was organizing for the Greater Dayton Christian Connection, I think it was called then. Is it? Okay. So he asked me if I would be on a panel about Israel with whatever her name was. She was the nun who was at the University of Dayton.
Oh, yeah.
It was rapidly.
Martin.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Now, several people said to me, you can't do that. And I said, no, I have to do that. In other words, for the people who are going to be sitting out there listening, they have to see then I am listening to what she has to say and countering it. And then she's not gonna listen to what I have to say. Now, in other words, this is just public relations, that what works better is to listen to each other rather than to lecture. I don't know what's another, because I think our kids, many of them, are trying to do what they thought they were being taught.
Yes, and that's what he comes back with. This is what you said, you know. that-
They think that, and they were taught this.
Mhm.
And so what I want to show them is everything that troubles them troubles me. Except I think Israel has a right to the army and has a right to defend itself. And simply because it's bigger and tougher doesn't mean it doesn't have those rights. That this is not the playground. But am I troubled by what's happening with Palestinians? Yes. Am I troubled by what's happening with Orthodox Jews? Yes. Am I troubled by what's happening with the government? Yes. So let's work on that together. Now, is that going to work every time? I don't know that it works every time, because there's all this peer stuff, there's all this other thing that's going on. It's now part of the way that you're part of the in crowd, as if you're anti-Zionist.
Anti-colonials.
But then you can have an ongoing conversation,
Right.
because you haven't shut it down.
Exactly right.
It's good.
Exactly right. And I think that that's part of the Zionist agenda. Does that make sense? As opposed, we bought in too quickly to the untroubled committed. That's the real agenda. It's like we buy into, oh, the Orthodox, they're the real Jews. We have to avoid that. We have to recognize ambiguity, communicate ambiguity, share the ambiguity. It's very hard what I'm just describing.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you in the street. You sign up for the Sofian newsletter.
Keep us updated if you can. I mean, I know you have enough to do, but.
Actually, yeah, if there's something that I think